Hey church, it's good to be with you, bringing you a daily hope on Isaiah chapter 47. And I'm speaking to you from a quaint little gazebo perched on the hill here in Oceanside, on the grounds of the Prince of Peace Abbey. It's a living, breathing monastery that you could come visit if you wanted to. I'm about halfway through what's known as the Stations of the Cross. For those of you that don't know, that's a spiritual practice that our Catholic brothers and sisters and the monks here use to meditate deeply and intentionally on the story of Christ's crucifixion. It's a fitting place to come during this season of Lent, and it's a quiet place that I like. I bring that up because, why? Well, because the stories that we meditate on, that we immerse ourselves in, matter. Stories shape so much of our identity. What stories are you telling yourself today? Are you telling yourself a story of hope, or a story of discouragement, a story of fear? Well, here in Isaiah chapter 47, the prophet is telling a story. It's a story of judgment for Babylon on one hand, and a story of hope for the people of Israel on the other. And the central actor in this story is not Babylon. It's not Isaiah the prophet himself. It is, in fact, God. He names him verse 4. It's our Redeemer. The Lord Almighty is his name. He's the Holy One of Israel. And he is the one who is acting in this chapter. And he's revealing, through the prophet Isaiah, the story that animated the Babylonian Empire. It's one of the empires in the ancient Near East that had dreams of global domination and conquest. It invaded Israel as God's judgment. God used them as a tool of judgment upon the people of Israel for their disobedience, for that walking away, that hardening their hearts towards God. But now, God is judging the Babylonian people. In part, why? Well, in verse 6 we see it's because that they showed the people of Israel no mercy. Even after they had subjugated them, they put an intolerable burden on them, even the widows, God says. And that stirs up God's desire to judge Babylon. Now, what story was animating Babylon that deserved such punishment? It's a story of self-aggrandizement. It's a story of indulgence. It's a story of pride. We know that because 3 different times in this chapter, we hear this phrase. In verse 7, it says, "You said, Babylon, I am forever the eternal queen." Then later in verse 8, you're saying to yourself, I am, and there is no one beside me. Later down in verse 10, I am, and there is no one beside me, repeated again. Now that phrase might remind you of a different phrase, right? A name of God that God gives to Moses. I am who I am, or I am who I will be, kind of in Hebrew. And that sets Babylon in opposition to God. And it's Babylon saying, look at how great and powerful I am. I have no need to heed God's commands. I have no need to respect his people. I can just continue to indulge in everything, and I'm safe from judgment. My wisdom is enough. That's what we see at the end of the chapter here, is the prophet basically mocking all of the different ways that the Babylonian Empire got information to make their decisions. They used astrologers, they used stargazers to try and peer into the future and to make decisions that would continue to expand the empire. Thinking about this chapter, it's hard to not be reminded of the times that we live in right now, because we're watching an age-old story play itself out. The story of Babylon is the same animating story that is driving the egoic aspirations of Putin that we're seeing unfold as the tragic, immoral, and wrong invasion of Ukraine is taking place. But it's worth us pausing and asking ourselves the question of, what am I building my life on? Am I worrying about the future? Am I looking for wisdom to guide my decisions from I don't know, bankers, business analysts, news, politicians, the internet in general? Or am I seeking God's face? Am I coming to quiet places like Prince of Peace Abbey here, going on a walk and immersing myself in the story of God, in the story of our Redeemer? Because ultimately, in times of uncertainty like this, where we are fearful, where the pressures of the world seem to be rising, political division, economic hardship. I did not like filling up my car the other day at the gas pump. The fear of global conflict. It's so important for us who are supposed to be people of peace to ground and immerse ourselves in the story of the Prince of Peace, the God who came and whose death on the cross and whose resurrection forever unmasked the powers that seem to dominate our world. That is a story that we can find hope in. That is a story that we should use to ground ourselves, or to remind us that, hey, we are sons and daughters of the Lord Almighty, the Prince of Peace. And because of that, we don't have to live in fear. Because of that, we can move out even towards our enemies and pray blessings upon them and pray for their well-being, their salvation, even as we cry out to God for justice. So I hope that this could be of some encouragement and hope to you, church, that despite what's going on, God is a God of justice. It's He who moves the wheel of history, not mankind. All empires have the same destiny, which is destruction. Only the kingdom of God in the end will remain steadfast. So let's fix our hearts and our minds on Christ today, shall we? Prince of Peace. Blessings, church.